2020 was a year of comfort media. It was also a year of returning to classics to see them as something more than classic. Because that's a word that often feels far more representative of what others think. To me, the term is difficult to separate from its usage by the collective. In this instance, that's the anime watching community at large. There are a fair few titles that pop into my mind after hearing the word, and not all of them are personal favorites. They're the works we recognize as having significant cultural meaning. Something like Cowboy Bebop, because I didn't utterly adore it when I originally watched it at the tail end of high school. I liked it, but it was still just a classic. Upon my second viewing though, I was on the verge of turning 29, and with additional years came a whole lot of life experience that made the story of the Bebop and its bounty hunter crew a lot more personal. Something that I have not gotten out of my head months later. Nailing down exactly what about Cowboy Bebop that leaves me in such a state would take much longer than I can afford, but there is one scene that embodies the series and so much of its strengths in such a stellar way. It comes in the 24th episode entitled Hard Luck Woman. Spike, Jet, Faye, Ed, and Ein have been together for an indeterminate amount of time, but not an insignificant one. Their days of mostly mutually beneficial relationships kept at a distance as to avoid emotional entanglement comes to a head as Spike spirals towards his inevitable fate. Hard Luck Woman, though not the finale, is the moment. The point where the cast hits the proverbial fork in the road and must decide where their future lies. Its paths branch, lives once entangled, detangling and venturing off to the places they belong. Throughout the show, Faye's past has remained a mystery, not only to the rest of the crew, but herself. Having experienced some sort of accident 50 years prior that resulted in her being sealed away, coming to with only snapshots of life before that haunts her, tormenting her with what could have been, but now she's lost in a world she doesn't recognize without a familiar face in sight, a debt tied around her neck like a noose. She finds comfort within the rusting halls of the Bebop, though she's entirely uncomfortable with admitting as much. At multiple points she has breakthroughs and failures, but in this episode it all comes rushing back. Finally, she knows. That hole which has defined her character is no longer, and she returns to her childhood home. But that's absurd. It's been 5 decades since she was put on ice. A plethora of technological advances and earth-altering tragedies have happened in that time span. Of course the answer to Faye's plight was obvious from the get-go. Of course this outcome was to be expected, but hell if I don't feel for her. Despite a predictable resolution, that doesn't make this moment any less relatable, any less drenched in the familiar flaws of us all. Romanticizing the past while in the midst of a present that leaves us unhappy is an easy trap to fall into. This deeply human predicament, well, it's Cowboy Bebop. It's nearly every inch of a universe that dons the accoutrements of times long gone, where the scars of the present were far-off worries. This isn't the story of an apocalypse or anything so large-scale, but it is one of continual tragedy. The grind of one awful day after another. Events the crew of the Bebop would like to stop in a better world where they knew they had any real impact on the woes of the many. But instead they carry on. There's a reason the show begins with a tale of Spike and Jet chasing down a couple on the run from their old criminal organization. Fleetingly, they try to escape the weight of the past that ties them to the present and ultimately denies them their future. It's all a reflection of the reality the protagonists live within. You could just look at the series as an enjoyable set of one-off adventures that range from zany, drug-induced jamborees to melancholy tales of fatality, and everything in between. Ask why that is though. Ask why the studio chose an episodic format. Even in the more lighthearted romps, there is some degree of misfortune. There's a cycle of meeting new faces that intersect with the lives of the Bebop for a brief instance, getting insight into how they live. And then coming out the other side, often in the same state they entered, is the point. The episodic nature is core to this, that life can so easily break us down one injustice at a time, or we compromise ourselves in order to just get through the day. And that's a really relatable feeling, especially these days. Which is why this moment of life in transition hits me so hard. Faye is off discovering her past. Meanwhile, Jet, as he often does, has cooked up dinner for everyone. It's never anything fancy, it's often just what they can afford. He peers into the main hall, calling out "dinner's ready," but for the first time in over a dozen episodes, no one is sitting on the old yellow couch or the stairs where they so often would be found. Jet climbs up to the bridge to find Spike looking forlornly down at the deck while puffing a cigarette. Written there is a message from Ed, the young hacker girl who found a home on the Bebop away from the asteroid-blasted landscape of Earth where her story began. It's not some melancholy farewell, but the same bright, cheerful smile. They don't chase after her or the adorable corgi, Ein. Instead, the duo who sparsely populated the ship halls at the start of the show now once more sit down to a dinner by themselves. The recurring motif of cheaply made one-course meals met with the humorous heartache of these two grown men hardened by years of crime and bounty hunting, just shoving far too many hard-boiled eggs into their gullets. Despite what they said about not wanting anyone else around, they already miss them. They know what this means, but they also know that in their departures, some sort of future that these two may never have awaits their friends. For better and worse, Faye does eventually come to the conclusion that the past she had been chasing away from the Bebop this entire time is long gone. Eventually returning, but Ed and Ein, this is the last we ever see of them, and there are still 2 more episodes. I remember when I first saw this so many years ago, it bothered me. 2 beloved characters were gone, off into the sunset, never making the grand re-entrance at the height of the finale's climax. No epilogue check-in, but in truth, it's what's best. They're not walking into a sunset, they're walking towards a future that is bright, unlike the bleak one the rest of the crew faces. Ed is a child and had to go. She needed to not end up another tortured soul. The Bebop was only a transitionary moment in her life, one she can hopefully have some fond memories of, but ultimately walk away from, which Faye, Jet, and Spike never can, at least not cleanly. In the decade since I last watched Cowboy Bebop, a lot has happened in my life. I've dealt with loss, I've moved several times, struggling financially as college debt payments continue to climb, have since gone back to my childhood home. Suffices to say, Spike's woes of seeing the past in one eye and the present in the other feels very real. I make these videos sometimes because it gives me an opportunity to talk about life, that which is portrayed in the media I discuss, and my very own. I don't care about convincing folks I have the one true opinion. That's a really boring and unhelpful way of talking about all of this. I do so because, well, it's a little cheesy, but empathy. Because one of the many values of art is how it connects us. Such is what makes me hope that what I've said here even scratches the invaluable nuance of a show like Cowboy Bebop. So just another short one until we get to the next video. I'm kinda just throwing some of my old anime opinions, or refurbished anime opinions out there these days. Finally getting them off my chest. I do occasionally talk about new stuff though. I did so recently over on my Patreon. For $1 you get access to some bonus posts that include things like me talking about what I've been watching from this 2020... Wait, it's not 2021 winter anime season. Stuff like Wonder Egg Priority or Yuru Camp Season 2. For all those that already donate, thank you so much, it's greatly appreciated. And to everyone who's supported this channel in any way, again, thank you very, very much.